My friend and I were driving home from another friend's house. I stopped at a gas station off Route 17 in New Jersey, not far from the New York state line, to fill up my tank. My gas cap is on the driver's side, so when I pulled in, the pump was on my left. There was a car in front of me that was just about finished, but I decided to stay at the middle pump anyway. On the other side of the pump, there was an SUV already at the first pump. The SUV had its windows rolled down, and so did we. After about a minute, the car in front of us pulled away, and it was just my car and the SUV at the station. The attendant went inside the little store adjacent to the gas station parking lot during this time while we were both filling up. My friend and I were just joking around and laughing about the night when we suddenly went quiet. We could hear two adults arguing inside the SUV. They were getting louder and louder. We also heard a child sobbing. After a little while, the sobbing turned into crying, and the crying got louder and louder as well. At this point, the attendant came out of the little store, but the people inside the SUV didn't notice him because they kept yelling and swearing. What I didn't realize at first was that they didn't even notice us either. My friend and I were right there getting gas too. And then it happened. The woman in the SUV whipped around to face the child in the back seat and in this cold, furious voice shouted, "You're never going to see your parents again, so stop crying." My friend and I looked at each other with eyes popping out of our heads. A million thoughts rushed through our minds. Maybe the kid's parents had passed away. Maybe the child was being adopted. Maybe the woman was just being cruel and messing around. But the thought we kept repeating was, maybe this was a kidnapping or an abduction. All of this was happening within seconds. At this point, they must have heard the click of the gas pump shutting off because the man and woman in the SUV suddenly went silent. The only sound was the child sobbing. That's also when they seemed to realize they weren't alone. I noticed the woman trying to peek out from behind the door pillar to see if we were watching. I paid the attendant and started to pull out of the gas station. I glanced into the rear window of the SUV, which was rolled down, and saw just the top of a small head and little hands covering a face. The SUV was tall, so I couldn't see much more. Then I looked at the passenger seat, and the woman gave me the most demonic look I've ever seen. I swear it felt like she was trying to suck the soul out of my eyes. I tried to glance at the male driver, but he just stared straight ahead, expressionless. We pulled onto Route 17, and I kept checking my mirror to see if she was still watching us, but with the glare of the station lights, it was hard to tell. On 17, I drove way under the speed limit while my friend and I debated what to do. Do we call the cops? Do we confront them ourselves? I decided I'd drive slowly, and if the SUV passed us, we'd trail them and call the police. There had been an exit just after the gas station, so they could have turned off and avoided us, but luckily, that didn't happen. A few minutes later, the SUV sped past us, flying down the road at what had to be 75 or 80 miles per hour. I don't know if they realized it was us or if they just didn't care. Instantly, we decided to follow, but at a safe distance so they wouldn't notice. At this point, we were on the thruway, the road wide open. We kept our distance, around 10 bus lengths, while trailing them at 80 miles an hour. There were no exits for miles on that stretch. We made up our minds to call 911. My friend dialed while I drove, explaining everything to the dispatcher. She asked for the mile marker we were passing and told us not to approach, that a police cruiser would be waiting at the next on-ramp. So we kept pace just to make sure they didn't get away. When we passed the first exit, I think it was for Woodbury Commons, there was no police car. The northbound side was still completely empty. By then, I realized I had gotten a little too close, about 10 car lengths, so I backed off. About a minute later, still flying at 80, I spotted headlights in my rear view. At first, they were far away, but they closed the distance incredibly fast. Moments later, a state police car shot past us, gunning straight toward the SUV. He tailed them for a few seconds, then the light bar flicked on. We both let out a breath of relief. The cop was pulling them over. As we drove past, another cruiser, sirens and lights blazing, came speeding up behind to join in. For days afterward, my friend and I kept checking the news and searching online, hoping to see something. Reports of a kidnapping, an abduction, or police intervention. Nothing ever came up. We never found out what really happened. But that look the woman gave me, that voice, those words told me everything I needed to know that night. Maybe it was some sick joke, but from her tone and her eyes, we just knew the kid's future might have been in danger. I'd like to think we helped that child, but I guess I'll never know. About 7 years ago, when I was 17, my parents went out of town for a weekend and left me at home. This was pretty common, my parents trusted me. Usually I'd spend these weekends staying with friends or family since my parents' house is a bit creepy to be in alone, even during the day. We live in a small rural town where everyone knows each other and generally, it's pretty quiet and safe. That Saturday I was supposed to stay with a friend, but her parents decided at the last minute not to let me. It wasn't a big deal. I was somewhat prepared for it since her parents sometimes got weird about company. By around 9:30, maybe closer to 9:45, I was on my way home from her house, which was only about a 15-minute drive from my parents' place. On the way home, I got a weird feeling I can't really explain. I just knew I didn't want to stay at my parents' alone. I called my brother and asked if I could stay with him. At the time, he was living with a woman who had a small child. He told me it would be easier if he came to stay with me, since his dog would bark if I tried to come in the house. He said he'd get to our parents' place in 20 minutes or so. And just so you have the picture, my brother isn't exactly someone you'd want to mess with. Tall, muscular, heavily tattooed, the kind of guy people tend to avoid. After hanging up, I decided to stop at a gas station for a snack, so my brother would already be there when I got home. I pulled in and saw only a few cars in the lot, which was normal for our small southern town where everything basically shuts down after 8 p.m. I parked and walked to the door. A man standing outside smoking opened it for me without saying anything. That's pretty normal southern hospitality, especially since I'm female. I smiled and thanked him. Inside, another man was standing near the door. As soon as I walked in, I noticed him staring at me. His eyes crawled over me in that gross up and down way before he muttered, "Hey sexy, what are you doing here all alone?" The words felt slimy, like they stuck to my skin. I didn't answer. I just turned and headed for the back of the store, heart pounding. He yelled after me, calling me a bitch. I still ignored him. I figured he was drunk, high, or just an asshole. Around here, people talk a big game but rarely back it up. I wasn't scared, just annoyed. I grabbed my snacks and paid at the counter. When I walked back outside, both men were gone. I was relieved I wouldn't have to deal with any more catcalling. I began walking across the lot toward my car about 100 feet from the door. While walking, I glanced at my phone to check the time and see if my brother should be at my parents' yet. When I looked up, the creep from earlier was standing at the pumps, staring. I looked at him briefly, then kept walking. "Hey, you know you're supposed to answer a man when he speaks to you," he said. I muttered something snarky back, got in my car, and locked the doors immediately. He looked pissed at my sarcasm. I started the engine, ready to head home, when I realized he had disappeared. Looking around before pulling out, I noticed both men sitting in a car across the lot facing mine. They were staring and talking, occasionally pointing at me. I stared back, defiant. I didn't want them thinking they'd scared me. That's when the man who had opened the door earlier smiled and made a finger across the throat gesture, as if to say, "You're dead." I rolled my eyes and pulled out of the lot, irritated. But to my dismay, they pulled out behind me. Up until that moment, I hadn't really been scared because most people around here are more talk than action. Instead of going home, I took a few back roads that looped back in a circle to test if they were really following me. And of course they were. When they realized what I was doing, they sped up, tailgated me so close I couldn't even see their headlights, and laid on the horn nonstop. I called my brother and told him what was happening. He told me to come home, that he'd handle it. So I started heading straight to my parents' place, with those assholes still riding my bumper and blaring their horn. Even with the detours, I was only about 3-4 minutes away. As I slowed to turn into the driveway, I felt immediate relief. At the end of the driveway stood my brother, shirtless, shoulders squared, hands crossed in front of his stomach, clearly holding a pistol. His intimidating pit bull sat calmly by his side. I pulled into the yard. The two men actually started to pull in behind me, until they saw my brother. The second they did, they sped off, hightailing it out of there. I'll never know what they would have done if I'd stopped somewhere alone or kept driving that night. But I always think fondly of that image of my brother standing there like a total badass, ready to protect me. I'll always be thankful he was there. I live in the downtown area of a pretty major city. My street is relatively quiet, but I can't say the same for the surrounding neighborhoods. My city as a whole is infamous for drug activity and gun violence. We also have an increasing number of homeless people, as most of our shelters have closed down. I've generally never minded. Shit happens, and I didn't grow up in the best of circumstances either. I would never stereotype anyone based on their housing status, and at the time, I was even involved with a homeless outreach program. But after what happened, I left and never went back. Since then, I've been hesitant to help anyone. It was around 10 p.m. and I was headed to my partner's parents' house about 30 minutes away from my place. I got about 2 blocks away before realizing I needed gas. I wasn't thrilled about the idea of stopping at a gas station near my apartment at that time of night, but I knew I couldn't make it all the way to the suburbs. I pulled into one in a not-so-great part of the neighborhood. Still, it was brightly lit, and with plenty of people walking by, I didn't think much of it. I filled up my tank and went inside to grab a couple of snacks. When I came back out, a tall man in a black coat and brown beanie started casually chatting with me. I couldn't tell if he was 25 or 40. His voice was so low I could barely make out what he was saying. Something about being a music producer and working on a new project. He seemed friendly enough, though maybe a little erratic, so I let him ramble for a few minutes before politely telling him I needed to get going. He told me his name was Mac. I unlocked my car and started to get in, when suddenly this guy slid right into the passenger seat beside me. In that instant, he wasn't some friendly, chatty stranger anymore. I was terrified. What unsettled me even more was how calm his demeanor still was. He acted like this was the most normal thing in the world. While I've had my fair share of creepy encounters, nothing like this had ever happened to me. I didn't scream or tell him to fuck off. I just froze, scared of what he might do if I resisted. "I need money for my son," he said. "He's in the hospital with a gunshot wound. His mom's waiting for me." I knew this story was bullshit, but I just wanted him out of my car. I gave him what little cash I had in my wallet and told him I needed to get going. Then he had the nerve to ask, "Can you drive me to my friend's house? It's right up the road." Wasn't he supposed to be going to the hospital for his son? I tried to decline as politely as I could, saying my boyfriend was waiting for me. That opened the floodgates to a bunch of personal questions about my sex life, what my boyfriend and I were going to do, and some extremely gross, unsolicited comments about my body. I've tried to block out his exact words, but it was disgusting. I thought, this is it, this is the end, I'm trapped in my own car. The gas station parking lot was empty. I couldn't call the police, and even if I could, it would have been a bad idea. I wish I could say I came up with a clever plan to get myself out, but I didn't. Panicked and frozen, I finally agreed to take him to where he supposedly wanted to go. He had me driving around the neighborhood, winding through dark side streets filled with seemingly abandoned houses, for what felt like forever. Eventually, he told me to stop in the parking lot of a beauty salon, where his friend supposedly worked, and would give him a ride to the hospital. The lot was on a busy, well-lit street. If he planned to kill me, it was a terrible place to do it. He was all over the place, talking rapidly, his story changing constantly. It was obvious he was high as a kite, and probably mentally unstable too. Yet he acted like we were longtime friends, and nothing about this was terrifying. He kept repeating that he'd do anything to trade places with my boyfriend. It was so gross. I gently reminded him I needed to leave, but he kept insisting I stay because his friend would pay me back for helping his son. I couldn't help but wonder, if that were true, why couldn't she just give him the money directly? I asked him what was taking so long. He shrugged and asked, "Can I use your phone to call her?" I wanted to say no, maybe it was just a ploy to steal my phone. But the thought that he could be dangerous lingered, so I reluctantly handed it over. I should have dialed the number for him. He took forever fiddling with it, and while I glanced away, suddenly, I couldn't believe it. He was sitting next to me, watching porn and getting off right in front of me. I wish I could prove this because I know it sounds unbelievable, but it's true. And that image is burned into my memory. I should have seen it coming. At that point, I snapped. I told him to get the fuck out. I was done. Then he actually started crying. More like wailing about how hot I was, how he couldn't stand the idea of me being with another man, and how I turned him on so much. I just stared at him thinking, okay, too bad, you need to leave. Then he straightened up with a big smile and said, "I'm just fucking with you. I'm not a pussy, so I wouldn't cry like that. Are you sure you don't want to take me to a completely different location?" I told him my boyfriend was probably worried since it had already been an hour. Somehow that finally got through to him. He got out and left. I drove to my partner's house shaking. Since we'd only just started dating, I didn't want him to think I was stupid. So I casually told him I'd just dealt with a creep at the gas station. Much later, I told him the real story, and he was appropriately horrified. I wish I could say it ended there, but soon after I started getting calls from all kinds of local numbers. Only one voicemail was ever left, just breathing and faint words I couldn't make out. I was creeped out but tried to dismiss it as paranoia. Then one day I actually answered. "Hey, it's Mac, I have your money." I felt sick. "I don't need it," I said. "Leave me alone." I hung up as he started rambling about how beautiful I was and how he wanted to see me again. I blocked every strange number that had been calling me, and eventually the call stopped. I can't imagine how he got my number, but my best guess is when he called his friend, he saw it at the top of my contacts. You may wonder why I never called the police. My city is notorious for police using excessive force, especially downtown. People are regularly killed by cops here, and I've personally witnessed people beaten for minor infractions. I'm not trying to make a political statement, but I truly felt I'd be putting myself in more danger by calling them. Best case, nothing would have been done and I'd be lectured for letting him into my car. Worst case, they'd shoot him and I'd have to live with that forever. I've regretted it since, though. A friend of mine later had her own encounter with him on the opposite side of the city. He gave her the exact same my son's in the hospital story. She drove him around aimlessly for an hour before finally screaming at him to get the fuck out.